The Restraining Acts of early 1775 were two acts passed by the Parliament of Great Britain which limited colonial trade in response to both increasing and spreading civil disobedience in Massachusetts and New England, and similar trade restrictions instituted by elected colonial representatives. With time, the foment would spread to most of its American colonies. The first Restraining Act, 1503, c. 10, known variously as the New England Trade and Fisheries Act, the New England Restraining Act, or the Trade Act 1775, limited the export and import of any goods to and from only Great Britain, Ireland, and the British West Indies. It also prohibited the New England colonies from fishing in the waters off Newfoundland and most of America's Atlantic coast without special permissions and documentation, and imposed stiff penalties on both perpetrators and administrators if violations occurred. Previously legal or finesse trade between the colonies themselves or with other nations was prohibited and enforced by naval blockade effective July 1, 1775. The Second Restraining Act, 1503, c. 18, known also as the Trade Act 1775, similarly limited the export or import of any goods by way of only Great Britain, Ireland, and the British West Indies for most colonies south of New England. It was passed shortly after the first, upon receiving news in April that the colony's trade boycott had spread widely among other colonies. New York, Delaware, North Carolina, and Georgia would escape these restraints on trade, but only for a few months. The Restraining Acts were passed 1 year after the first of the Intolerable Acts had been imposed to show the potential of tighter British sovereignty over Boston, Massachusetts, and threatened the same treatment in other colonies generally. Instead of quieting the populace, these coercive laws had been met with increasing resistance and rising resentment among the colonials. Over this same period, the colonies established independent communications, and the First Continental Congress established the colonials' boycott to restrain the import of British goods, then the export of colonial products, which caused disruption in British trade and revenues and shortages in the colonies themselves. Additionally, the colonies had established alternative legislatures in defiance of established ones under direct imperial control. The growing defiance caused a mutual scramble for munitions and treasonous acts to obtain them, indicating that more violence was on the horizon. News arriving about the first Restraining Act and related actions of the Massachusetts military governor would lead directly to the first military confrontation in the American Revolutionary War. With fighting started, any possible reconciliation became moot, and the king would issue his royal proclamation of rebellion in August. In December 1775, Parliament passed the Prohibitory Act prohibiting any trade with all the colonies, and enforcing it with a tighter blockade and more severe penalties. It was a declaration of economic war, with inbound or outbound ships, mariners, and cargoes treated as if they were the ships and effects of open enemies, to be so adjudged, deemed, and taken in all courts. With this drastic change in British tactics, effective January 1, 1776, the two Restraining Acts as well as the Boston Port Act were repealed, whereas the prohibitions and restraints imposed by the said acts will be rendered unnecessary by the provisions of this act.